Welcome to From the Desk, an official podcast of Bethel Community Church. My name is Solomon Mochpao. I get to serve as the pastor of family and youth. And sadly, Pastor Leonard is out of town, so is unable to join us for the podcast today. So sad for you, listener. It's just me today, but hopefully there are still some things for you to walk away with from this episode. Yesterday was Father's Day, and we got to worship together as a church, and it was awesome, as always, to get to be together with the church family. And I had the privilege of preaching through Psalm 128. And one of the things that were built into this psalm is this idea that men spiritually lead their families. I think one of the questions that we have to ask is how can husbands spiritually lead their families practically on the ground? It's one thing for us to know in theory that men are the spiritual leaders of their homes, but it's another thing to say, okay, men, or even wives listening to this, what does that look like? Or single people who plan to be married one day, what does this look like practically? And there are just a couple big picture general things, and then maybe specific things that we can think about because it's summer. So because it's summer, pray with your family. So you could pray with your wife. Just be a man who prays. So you should be praying, have your own relationship with God, have your own time with Him. I don't know how we can expect to live as Christians. I don't know how we can even call ourselves Christians if we don't have a real relationship with God. So make sure that you are someone who fears God, who spends time with Him on your own, and pray. Pray for your wife, pray for your kids. Pray that God would bless them, pray that God would draw near to them, pray that God would save your kids, pray that your wife, if she's a believer, that God would restore to her the joy of her salvation, that He would bless her if she's at home with the kids or if she's at work during the day. If she's lonely, if she has friends that are going through hard things, if she's needing relationships or friendship, pray that God would be her provider in these ways. Pray for your marriage and pray with her. So I know schedules are crazy sometimes, that they don't always line up, but I'm sure you get time with your wife. How much of a priority is praying with your wife? And maybe the bare minimum is you eat together sometimes. Maybe you go on a date together. Maybe you have an anniversary trip. Set aside specific times to pray, like on your anniversary, even if it's just once a year. Maybe your anniversary is coming up. Talk to your wife beforehand and ask her, hey, are there specific things that we should be praying for? And then on either your anniversary, just take 15 minutes. You don't need to set a timer or anything, but just go through and pray through that list together. Have her pray and then you pray. I find that those times praying with my wife are some of the times where I get to really hear what is happening in my wife's heart. How's she seeing God in this season? How's God working in her life? So I would highly encourage you, pray with her. And if you go to bed together, use some of those times to pray with one another for your kids and for the things going on in your life. And then pray with your kids. Again, this is meal times, this is bedtimes, and even if it's just meal times, if you're actually praying, so don't just go through the motions, but if you're actually praying, that teaches your kids how to pray, that prayer is important, that we know that God doesn't work in the world in some mysterious way without us praying. So pray. And then read. Especially read the Bible. Now you can read Christian books, you can read Christian biography, but at least you should be reading the Bible. One, read it yourself. Again, men, how can you expect your kids to love the Bible, your wife to love the Bible, if you do not love the Bible? Are you equipped to answer the questions that your kids might have about God? But why is there evil in the world? Why is there suffering in the world if God is all loving and powerful? Why are hard things happening in their life? How can you answer them using the Bible when they come to you with hard things happening in relationships at school? So one, be a person, be a man who reads the Word. And then lead and feed your family with the Word. In some sense, you are the first shepherd, the on-the-ground, first line of defense, spiritual leader, spiritual shepherd of your family. So give them the one thing that can lead them and feed them, which is the Bible. And it can feel, especially if your kids are older, this can feel harder if you haven't done this, you haven't been reading. And maybe this can start with your wife. To ask your wife, hey, can we start reading the Bible together once a week? Just one psalm or a few verses or one chapter. And then can we start doing this with our kids? And there's a family I can think of off the top of my head now where they read one chapter of the Bible before they go to bed as a family. And it might not sound like a lot, it might not sound crazy, but if you do that year after year, you actually start to finish huge chunks of the Bible. I know this family I'm thinking of, they just finished the Old Testament. Could you imagine reading the Bible one small bit at a time where you actually start to finish a chunk of the Bible as big as the Old Testament? Imagine the kind of fruit that would produce in your family. And then engage. Just engage them. So treat your commutes, treat standing in line at the grocery store, bedtimes, times at meals, times where your kids are pulling you aside or you're going on a walk. Use those times to disciple them, to lead them. Instead of waiting for your wife to come to you where she feels like she has to force what her thoughts or how she's feeling onto you, draw them out of her. Ask her, get out in front and lead her and ask her what is going on in her heart. What is she thinking about? What is she meditating on? What is God teaching her? What is she struggling with? Do you know? Do you know what your wife is struggling with? Do you know how God is working in your wife's heart? Be the man, be the husband that knows that it's getting out in front and leading your wife that way. And then be the same way with your kids. Kids, especially as they get older, it gets easy for them to hide what's actually going on in their hearts. But and research shows us all the time, the Word of God tells us this, your kids need you, especially dads. Dads, get involved in the emotional and spiritual life of your kid. And if your kid is older, it might be harder and feel more awkward, but you can still do this. It is never too late to get involved in the heart and life of your child. Like I said yesterday, God does not simply want us as men to provide financially, to provide food, to provide shelter for our families. He actually wants us to engage them at the heart level. So one of my old pastors used to say that as people and as Christians, I think this would be true of dads and husbands, make spiritual things natural and natural things spiritual. Make spiritual things natural and natural things spiritual. It should not be awkward or crazy or weird or in a blue moon where you talk about spiritual realities. As a Christian in a Christian home, it should be normal that you mention the things of God. And that you would look at the world, you would go on vacation, you would look at the ocean or the mountains or the sky or a sunset or you're out playing ball or whatever it is, that you would tie in the spiritual realities that are all around us to point back to the Bible. Now, especially with this being summer, we have so many opportunities to do this. Dads especially, make it your goal this summer to be more spiritually engaged, especially with your kids. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is the last few years, I've been reading these articles and some books and hearing some podcasts about one thing that's lost in our American culture right now is this idea of rites of passage. Historically, in different civilizations and different cultures, there were rites of passage that basically were markers where men in the community or women in the community, their dads especially, to their sons or with their daughters, had markers to say, do this, and on the back end, now you are a man. There is a switch from you being a child to you becoming a man. And now, in our American culture, we don't have many of those. Maybe it's getting your driver's license. Maybe it's graduating from high school. But something that you can think about, and especially if your kids are younger, something I would encourage you and your wife to think about is how can you maybe leverage some regular patterns in life, like your kid is going to graduate from 8th grade, your kid's going to get their driver's license, your kid's going to graduate from high school. How can you use those times to affirm verbally and with like a small party or with a gathering or an outing to tell your son, to tell your daughter, you are a man. You are a woman. This is what it means to be a man. This is what it means to be a woman. Have you considered or thought about when that switch happened for you? What did you need? What would have been helpful for you? How can you do that for your own child? So I would highly encourage you in this area. Doing something is almost always better than doing nothing. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be this extravagant thing. Do something rather than nothing, and almost every time it will be better. The other thing that I didn't get to mention a ton in the sermon is verse 5 and 6 says, "The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life." And then he ends by saying, "Peace be upon Israel." And between Mount Zion, between Jerusalem, between Israel, what we see here is that there are implications for wanting to see blessing in our communities on a local and national level, but also on in our church, on the church level. And you can just imagine, right, if we were a church filled with the kind of men who actually fear God, who are walking in their ways, who are leading their families, who have healthy marriages, who have healthy kids, and kids are growing up to become Christians because, dads are leading their families, they're reading the Bible with them, they're praying with them. They're not just tossing their kids into church programs and hoping that the church programs turns their kids into Christians and keeps them out of trouble, but families who are actually doing this. If we get this to happen, the culture of a church changes. I mean, could you imagine, and could you pray with me, that Bethel Community Church would be full of men where this kind of man is the norm? Where this kind of man is not rare, it's not hard to find, but actually you look around, the majority of men you see at Bethel are actually this kind of man. Can you pray with me towards that end? And when this happens, when a church starts to become a compelling community in this way, this starts to change our neighborhoods, this changes our workplaces, this changes our schools, and if this happens everywhere, this actually starts to change a nation. God help us that we would become a nation full of people, filled with families who are healthy and follow Jesus. I think that's the kind of transformation that we long for and need. And lastly, one of the songs that we sang to end our worship service was "Be Thou My Vision," a great classic hymn sung by the people of God for hundreds of years. And one of the lines that was so fitting to sing on Father's Day and in partnership with this psalm is the verse that says, "Thou my great Father, and I thy true Son." It reflects the reality that Jesus teaches us to pray, "Our Father in heaven." It brings healing and hope for those who have broken relationships with their dads, For those who even have had good dads, it shows us the true picture of fathers that your dad is reflecting. And it reminds us of the great privilege of getting to be the sons and daughters of God. That should be a grounding truth in shaping who we are and how we see ourselves in all of life. So I hope that this time together helps you practically see some of the ways we can apply Psalm 128, hopefully sees the beauty of the kinds of transformation that could happen if our church is filled with these kinds of men and families, and hopefully helps us understand better how we try to strategically and intentionally organize our worship gatherings to help us understand the larger theme of the morning. So thanks for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you this coming Sunday. God bless.